Today we're going to discuss another method of installing a dual boot system using Ubuntu 11.10 and Windows 7. In our previous videos we've set up the dual boot system using Wooby, and we've also used the install side-by-side option with the Ubuntu Live CD installer to allow Ubuntu to automatically go out and pick our settings for the partitioning. I've gotten several emails and several requests to do a video and answer some questions pertaining to how to manually set that up if you're using an older version of Ubuntu, or maybe if your version doesn't have a install side-by-side option, which I believe most of the newer versions do. I may be wrong about that, but I believe that's the case. Then we can go in and manually set up those partitions as well. There are a few things we need to do first. One of them being we need to break off some of that free space that Windows is currently using, if Windows is using the entire drive, and unallocate that space to Windows. That way we can use that extra partition for our Ubuntu setup. So in this case, I'm using a VirtualBox machine. This is a smaller VirtualBox hard drive. It's a little over 20 gigabytes in size. So I'm roughly going to dedicate just right around 10 or 11 gigabytes for each operating system. But if you are using your existing Windows machine, one of the things that I highly recommend doing is to, number one, back up all your data. Whether you have a flash drive, an external hard drive, burning them to DVDs or whatever, make sure you have all your data backed up just in case something happens. It's always good to be prepared. Number two, defragment your hard drive. Since I'm using a freshly installed version of Windows 7, I haven't had a whole lot of time to fragment my hard drive, to scatter files and data across the platters and the drives and whatnot. So I'm not necessarily going to have to get into the whole defrag process in this video, but we will show you how to do that. You see I've already got it in the shortcut bar there. So if we just go ahead and type in the search box and type disk, you will notice at the very top there is a disk defragmenter option. If you take that, we see that we can see two partitions. We see a system reserved and we see a C drive. We're going to defrag the C drive. So first off, just run analyze disk. It'll go out and scan the drive, make sure that it's not extremely fragmented. It will report back and tell you to what degree that drive is fragmented. So you can see I'm 2% fragmented. So we could actually go ahead and defrag it. Depending on the size of your hard drive and the storage capacity that you've currently used up on your hard drive, this could take quite a while. Smaller drives, newer installations, they typically go a little quicker. So we're going to go ahead and stop that operation and close it. Like I said earlier, if you are using an existing machine that is your working machine, I would recommend doing a complete defrag, just to make sure that all that data is contained in one spot and you're not going to accidentally break some off and truncate that data when you are installing Ubuntu. So now that you've defragged your hard drive, or not, in your case, go ahead and come back to the start button and click in search and type in the word disk again and look for the option to create and format hard disk partitions. Click that option and this will open the disk management utility that's built into Windows. You'll notice it looks very similar to some open source alternatives like gparted, and also some of the screens that you may see using the Ubuntu Live installer, which also uses a version of gparted to handle partitioning. So you can see here we have two partitions. We have a system reserve partition of 100 megabytes and we have a C drive. Both are formatted for the NTFS file system. We see that Windows sees them both as healthy partitions, and you can see the system reserved is of course 100 megs. Our C drive is just a little over 20 gigabytes in size. You can also see this information at the top of the screen as well. And you'll notice we can also see our CD-ROM drive there, which has no partitions listed. Down in the bottom left hand corner you'll notice there's a key. We have a black box, which refers to unallocated space. And we also have blue, which points to a primary partition. You'll notice that both of these partitions have blue stripes across the top. So they are in fact primary partitions. Our goal is to break off a chunk of the C drive, or the C partition, and make it unallocated. That way Windows will not see it, Windows will not mess with that space, we can simply leave that alone, and we will boot into our live CD and point Ubuntu to that unallocated space to set up our dual boot system. So how do we do that? It's pretty simple. We need to come up and we need to right click on the partition we want to manipulate, come down and shrink volume. It'll go out and verify that partition or drive, make sure that everything's okay with it, and once that's done, we'll see this wizard. By default, it roughly tries to guesstimate somewhere right in the middle of that partition size. So you can see that it's going to shrink it down about 9,741 megabytes, which translates to basically about 9.7 gig. Total size in megabytes after the shrink happens will be just a little over 11 gigabytes in size. So I'm going to leave that at default. You may want to change this to higher or lower depending on your situation, but we'll go ahead and click on shrink. This will take just a moment or two. Of course, this does depend on your drive size as well. Okay, now you can see that we also have a third partition, which is set at 9.51 gigabytes, and it is set at unallocated, which we can see by the black stripe listed across the top of that partition. Points it to being unallocated. So we'll simply File, Exit. Now just to make a quick point, if we go into the computer, go into the File Manager, you'll notice that there is no other partition here. This is a mapped share folder. Like I said earlier, this is a VirtualBox machine, so this is a shared folder with my host OS. So that really doesn't pertain to this video. Concerning partitioning, we only have one local hard disk, which is the C drive, even though we've technically created a new partition. So in this situation, we need to go ahead and close that. The reason Windows can't see it is, of course, because it is unallocated. So now that we have an unallocated partition of just a little under 10 gigabytes, Ubuntu's recommendations, if you go to their website and go through some of their guides, is that they recommend at least 10 gigabytes for the Ubuntu install. We're pretty close in this video, so next thing we need to do is get our Ubuntu 11.10 live CD, put it in the CD tray, and reboot your computer. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we will jump back in the video as soon as the live CD has booted up. Okay, welcome back. Now that the live CD is booted up, we need to take the option to either try Ubuntu or install Ubuntu. If you're just solely looking to install Ubuntu, if you've already had some hands-on time with the live CD, just simply click the Install Ubuntu button, since we don't actually need to boot into the full-blown live environment. Now, as I mentioned in previous videos, it'll pop up and say you need at least 4.4 gigabytes available drive space. That is the bare minimum to install Ubuntu. As I mentioned previously, the Ubuntu website, if you go through some of their guides, I recommend at least 10 gigabytes of space to have a happy operating system. That we have plenty of room to store files and applications and things of that nature. It also points out that you really need to be connected to the internet. Reason being, if you take some of these options to download updates or download third-party plugins, you have to be connected to the web to do that. For sake of time, I will leave these unchecked. We can install those later if needed. This is just a test box just for the primary example of setting up a dual boot. So we will not even worry with that right now. So click Continue. Now, we have our installation type dialog box. In our previous versions, we have followed the Wooby installer, and in our last video on dual booting, we also set up Ubuntu alongside Windows 7. In this example, we're going to take something else. Click Continue. Now, if you do see the option to set up Ubuntu alongside another operating system, I would recommend taking that option. One reason being, it already does most of this for you. If you have a different situation that requires a little custom setup, by all means feel free to take the something else option and proceed through the installation this way. Now you can see we have our partitions listed. Up here at the top we have this little graph that basically points out that SDA1, that's the partition name as Ubuntu will see it, which is formatted as an NTFS file system at 104.9 megabytes, which is right there, just a little sliver of green. The remaining orangish color is our Windows 7 partition, which is labeled as SDA2. It's also an NTFS file system, and it's at 11.7 gigabytes. And you can notice now we have the remaining part of this graph is colored in white. That points to free space, 10.2 gigabytes. That is unallocated free space. So we'll come down here. If you're not that familiar with partitioning, it may be very handy to keep some notes during this process, especially if you have to reference these names. That just becomes handy later down the road. Once you do this for a few times, it's really not that difficult. So what we simply need to do is click on free space, and we need to add, and we're going to create a new partition. Even though this partition has been created, it is unallocated space. So basically it's just out in limbo. As of right now, Windows can't see it. Basically Windows thinks our roughly 20 couple gigabyte hard drive is only 11.7 gigabytes in size, which is, we know, not the case. So I'm going to go ahead and select primary, and we're going to leave that at the full size. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to take it down to about 8214. That gives us about 2 gig worth of free space for a swap partition. We're going to go ahead and mark it for the beginning, set it at the ext4 journaling file system. You can click on that drop down and change the file system, but we're going to go ahead and just leave it at the ext4. Mount point there. Now in some cases you may find some guides that prefer setting up a home partition as well. If you do that, what you'll essentially be doing is storing your files and your data in the home partition. That way if anything happens to your operating system partition for Ubuntu or whatever other version of Linux you may plan on installing there, you can install that to basically this mount point, just the backslash mount point there, and that will only affect that partition, leaving any data, any files in the home partition untouched. So that's a handy practice to get into. In this situation, we're just going to create 2 partitions. We're going to create the Ubuntu partition, and we're going to create the swap partition. Okay, now you can see we have a ext4 file system set up on SDA3, which we can see as marked blue, which corresponds to our key here at 8.2 gigabytes. You'll notice that our check mark is checked to format it. So essentially the Ubuntu installer will format SDA3 for the ext4 file extension. Now we need to scroll down, find our remaining free space of 2000 megabytes, and we need to add, and leave it there, and I'm just going to set this to a swap area, and we're going to click OK. Alright, now you can see we have an SDA5, which is considered as a Linux swap area or a swap partition. So we'll go ahead and click on install now, and there we go. We'll essentially just let the installer continue on through its process. If you're not familiar, if you haven't watched our other videos, we'll step through this right quick. We'll click on continue because this is just picking out our time zone. So we'll click continue, and you can notice at the very bottom we can see a little status bar counting up as it's copying files and doing the installation procedures. We'll go ahead and pick our keyboard layout, which all this is okay, so we'll go ahead and click on continue. You can test your keyboard layout there if you so choose. Okay, we'll go ahead and name it. Okay, I'll go ahead and use this. We'll set up a password. I'm not too concerned with security on this because, as I said, this is just a VirtualBox test machine. More than likely this machine will be deleted here in a few weeks anyways, so we will just go ahead and click continue. One thing to point out, if you do set a password, you can choose to encrypt your home folder. So any user data will be encrypted, which is kind of neat and handy. You can also choose to log in automatically as well. I will just leave it at the default, require my password to log in. Click continue. And that's about it as far as the setup goes. Now we're basically just letting the installer take its time and do its job. You can click through these slides if this is your first time installing Ubuntu. And you can read a little bit about what Ubuntu has to offer to new users, maybe some things that have changed in the most recent versions of Ubuntu, and they point you to some places you can go to get help should you need any help. So we'll go ahead and pause the video here. Once the installation is complete, we will reboot the machine and just verify that in fact our dual boot is working. Okay, now that the installation is complete, we need to simply just click on Restart Now. It's usually a good idea just to hold on until the prompt pops up to remove the disk. So we'll go ahead and just wait for it, and momentarily, there we go. Let me hop out here. It'll say please remove the installation media and close the tray if any, and press enter. Okay, so go ahead and take out that CD. Okay, once the CD is out, press the enter key. And there we go. We now have a grub bootloader screen where we can scroll down and we can select one of several options. We can either choose to boot into Ubuntu. We have recovery mode for Ubuntu. We also have a mem test, serial console for the mem test, and Windows 7. Mem test is very handy to use, especially if you maybe have some problems that might be culprit from your memory, from your RAM. Mem test does a really good job at testing that out. So just to make sure that we do in fact have a good working version of Ubuntu, let's go ahead and boot into Ubuntu. And we are greeted with our Ubuntu login screen. So let's just go ahead and log in to make sure we come to a working desktop. And there we have it. We have a working version of Ubuntu. Now we have one other thing we need to do just to make sure we didn't break anything with our Windows 7 partition. Let's just go ahead and reboot the computer one more time. I'm going to restart. And once we're back at grub, I will use the arrow keys on the keyboard to scroll down to the Windows 7 and press the enter key. And as you can see, we are now starting Windows. And just to go ahead and make a point about the Ubuntu partition not being visible within Windows, we'll point that out as well. One of the neat little tricks with Ubuntu is it can see the NTFS file system. By default, Windows cannot see the Ubuntu ext4 file system, or the other ext file systems for that matter. So if you do run a dual boot situation, your Ubuntu machine will see Windows, but Windows will not see Ubuntu. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and verify. Click on Start and go to Computer. And there we have it. We now have a dual boot system with Ubuntu 11.10 and Windows 7. And just to make sure, let's go back into our disk management utility. Okay. Now, within here, we can see a couple other file systems. But now you'll notice that Windows doesn't have them labeled as with a drive letter. You can see that how large they are. That is essentially our Ubuntu partition, and that is our Linux swap partition. We can see those partitions, but we cannot do anything with them right now. You can right click on them, and we could actually delete the volumes if we wanted to get rid of that. But that will be for another video. We'll discuss removing a Ubuntu dual boot, hopefully in our next video. So do tune in next time. As always, be sure you visit our website at techiesmarts.com. Also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see a box at the end of the video and the links in our video description or on the blog if you're watching there. Also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/techiesmarts and stay in touch. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below the video or on the blog, or you can also email me as well. So you can find all that contact information on our website at techiesmarts.com. So once again, thanks for watching and have a great day.